Okay, welcome back. I just had a thought. So I've been generally suggesting, saying, claiming, whatever you want to call it, that this mantle puncture hole, this is a first of all, it is a mantle puncture hole where space flowed in and mantle flowed out. And it had a generally a current in all directions, but it especially ended being in like a four directions kind of way, but it's even more so, especially in two directions along these ways. Okay. And maybe not the equator, and I don't know. I've been claiming equator, but let's look at a shallogram real quick. This one, where this is like the top of the Earth, and then it spirals out from the top of the Earth, so it's really not along like a middle point, like wrapping around like a ring. So maybe it's not along the equator like I've been claiming, but more like this, where essentially there's a current from like Dwarka. Like here's the puncture hole, and then it flows up this way into this region. And this is what I'm thinking is it wraps around and then out the somehow let's look at Earth. Essentially this current, this is I'm having an issue. The reason I'm thinking about the things I'm talking about is I'm having a general issue where I'm like, okay, this current goes this way and generally goes this way, and I know it's hard to tell what exactly happens here, which is part of the issue with figuring out what's going on here. But also, like up here, I've been saying somehow it generally goes over here. And maybe it does at some point here, like go up that way. Some reason it looks like there's a line up this way that like traces across or wherever it was there and into there. So that probably is related here. So there then that current is probably coming from like up here, going over here, across here, in here. And so maybe in a similar way, this current that comes over here doesn't actually merge with it, it crosses over it, like around this region. So maybe this is like a crossover location where there's like a double eddies, where this current, this general current from above the Himalayas, the current from above the Himalayas, above this section that formed around the Himalayas, not exactly the Himalayas because this is all underground, but above this like secondary boundary, this current, it's almost like it gets cold. I was thinking like it's lower temperature up here somehow. And so it like goes over here at a colder temperature and mixes with a hotter temperature. And so like there's a flame here, and it's almost like the cold air is flowing along the downward down through the flame. And then it's being physically heated by this fuel of a current that is hot, that is from the side, almost like it's the inflow of a like air at that like level that flows inward, and then in some way is being fueled like from down here in normal flames, but essentially maybe having currents of that nature to make that flame shape. And so maybe like this being coming down specifically at a lower temperature than this material just makes it more dense, Because I did mention it was more dense, but it didn't occur to me that it was more dense because it had like compacted and solidified into like more just solid material in a way. So, but like still there's this issue where I've just like over here I kind of lose this current. Like where does this, what is going on? I still don't really have a like complete idea of what I think is going on with this. And so I'm like, what is going on? And I was just now thinking, well, if this, what if this kind of comes this in here actually from around here? Like, what if this current, because essentially there's the issue that if it's just from the puncture hole coming across here, if it's as simple as that, it goes across and then it goes down. If it's that simple, then it bends weirdly. Like it's bending to the left, 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 and then abruptly to the right. Especially adding on top, mind you, the earth has yet to expand. And so like over here is actually way closer to this current. So it almost like goes up this way and then back along next to it right here. How is the momentum of it doing that? That's when I'm like, well, that really to me makes it all the more likely that it's actually going up to the pole, up this way, and then circling around here and meeting the resistance of this current generally over here. So wrapping around, hitting that current in general. This current, even though coming across from Europe, even though it's like flowing generally like within North America, it's pushing a boundary that basically is the boundary of North America. So like over here, it's just causing that current coming from the puncture hole up to the pole. It's causing that current to meet resistance this whole way, not just at Greenland, but this whole way, and just kind of forming a general resistance triangle here that's just more dense, and then the current flows through here more and more so. Like up here too, this whole region. To like here. So then the current, this current coming this way would seemingly be wrapping around and also crossing over this one here, so that like that there's novas in this region are probably closely related to that, especially right there. Maybe that's exactly where they were crossing over, right through there and through there. And so there was like this really distinct location. But because they were crossing over, they began to produce eddies, which then produced like this wall, because this current maybe was more generally going this way, but the it looks kind of like maybe up here. And like a boundary over on the other side though that more is in line with right there. Essentially then like producing eddies that produce masses that conglomerate over here, but there's nothing really, not enough pressure to push it through, so it just kind of sits there building like a wall segment. So then the current generally goes this way, generally goes that way, this way, which then means that when there's a current going this way, it runs into those currents around here where it then branches off in here and runs into the current again over here, so it then turns again, runs into the current here, so it turns again, and just fills this region with enough pressure, back pressure, to basically stop the current from flowing in, so that this region just is kind of like a bubble against the current, which then is forced to tend more this way than this way. So then it basically, let's see, that's interesting. This row of just where the currents are crossing, that produces like a really distinct one there. Maybe because this current is also there, so it's 3 currents really interacting at that point. And then they keep going to around this boundary. So I guess here, especially, where this current that doesn't go this way, that's going the other way, is creating a sort of boundary here. Then it's pushing over this way. And so these are just crossing streams because this one's generally going to the pole here. So it's crossing streams, and in so doing just creating this turbulent zone of many eddies that collectively form like individual eddies. Like each one of these is a crossover zone that produced an eddy, that then the collective of them produced an eddy that looks just basically like there's a lot of crossover here when the currents went across. And because one current was going this way, it kind of fans it out like in that direction. Okay, so we're getting somewhere in terms of this current specifically goes to the pole, goes this way, wraps around against the resistance, and flows across, where it again runs into resistance at the from the current coming this way, which is essentially going across here. So it kind of forms a boundary with that, and is just caused to flow generally this way. Here, it flows out there, but it must also, so essentially it doesn't just like deflect it over here, it also, because it's filling this region, it essentially tends it closer in and fills this region. So there's like a close current in here, I believe, and this current then just kind of spreads out over here once it passes this region where there's this cross current. Once it passes it, it begins to spread out and to the point that it can, where this is kind of flowing over it and interacting with that. The portion that's not flowing over and interacting flows more over in this direction and just is able to maybe hug this wall enough to just cross over here. So then we get a current from the North Pole bringing in this like cold energy, even maybe, because it like the mantle material that was flowing around deposited its heat up at the pole, and then was cooler, and then it moved down here where it then mixed as a cooler material with the still not like reached a pole kind of energy that's just flowed out here, across here. It hasn't gone to some feature of that nature, and it just went over here across and is still relatively hot. So then it begins to mix in just a relative temperature difference kind of environment, probably, which may play into just like any various differences in this terrain that I'm not able to just like immediately point out because I don't know that much. Maybe like caves, I don't know exactly why. That maybe just the mixing is creating just like porosity by currents flowing up down kind of thing, in a similar way to how the eddies produce these like turbulent terrains. Just in general, the hot and cold eddies here also produce turbulent terrains, but instead of being like in the terrain itself, it's in more of a subtle, in a heat way, whereas over here it's in a like a rock like mantle way, like the material itself. Over here it's in a heat way, where it's the temperature difference causing this turbulence in the region that is then causing a porosity rather than a elevation difference that's as dramatic as over here. That's what I'm thinking, that there's something of that nature. And it also like prevents mixing, but it almost like it causes because of the temperature differential, it causes one to flow atop the other more so than it would have, like, say over here where there's a bunch of eddies colliding materials, because they're more at the same temperature. Rather, like, they would almost be like, if the material was a different temperature, it'd almost have like a lower center of gravity, so like when the energies collide, they kind of slide atop and below one another if the temperature differential is there. But if it's this similar enough temperature, it just like directly collides head on, producing like actual up and down, like of the material itself. So over here it slides atop one another, but then what that does is produces a hot and cold layer atop one another that then begin to heat exchange perpendicularly through them, which then leads to probably just a high porosity without the, like, just a voids, essentially voids, because it's the subtle energy flows. It's not like filled. Like over here, the region is going to be more filled because there's like more density to it, but because of the lower the subtler particles involved, which heat is just really, really subtle particles that are like infinitesimal, where all we can really see is the particles as a collective behave as heat, but it's really just subtle particles. So in this instance, it's subtle particle flows that then produce voids. And in this instance, it's dense particle flows that are in both instances interacting, but in this case, I guess, colliding. And in this case, just like being adjacent and just exchanging across some sort of like boundary layer. But effectively, in so doing, like what it's doing is the heat is moving in a similar way and just reshaping the terrain in a similar way, where it's opening up gaps in a similar way and then producing porosity in a similar way. So like this is really just like heat stuck in this rock but in motion, because it's a current flowing that then physically shapes the rock because of the actual just intensity and like stability of the system. Like, it really doesn't extend enough to be like doing the same thing into the rock. It just really gets like a certain region and shapes it and creates pockets, but based on the currents of heat flowing that at times can burst the rock and like explode its side out, so that it just opens like a window into the inside. Here's one just like starting to do it. So it like separated, just like the continental crust, it separated it and then it bubbled in a new material of an underlying oceanic crust to fill the space. And in the case of Earth, it opened even more to a point where it had like a physical opening like this, but then the mantle flowed into it and filled it, so it's closed off. But it did have an opening. It's just closed off by materials, currents just free flowing into this empty space and just creating a layer that then is just, oh dear God, I don't even want to think about it. La la la. Probably a little thinner, maybe holding everything in the ocean up high. It's like the plug waiting to burst. Let it all back in because there's no more. Let's let space back out. Let it all back in. Cause Dwarka to rise out of the ocean, maybe. That would be crazy. That would be crazy. Okay, huge progress just in recognizing the current to float up that way, specifically the way where it wraps around and a portion of it is caused to flow this way and just bend against the resistance of adjacent currents and be caused to flow down this way. And also this current, I guess, because there's the current coming from down here, hitting Australia and then flowing up here, creating generally a boundary here along the other current's boundary, which is generally here. And maybe also some of this, like down here. So another segment of boundary that's more here, actually. And then that current wraps around because of it. It kind of, like, it certainly continues through it, but it all, because that's just what currents seem to do. It just becomes more subtle and more subtle and more subtle and then just not detectable whatsoever. But it also goes around, bends off of it and continues. And forms a boundary here. And other, like, multiple boundaries, just as there's multiple currents through here. Like, there's one here, 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 probably. That kind of crossover subtly over here, probably. More detectably here. Way more detectably here. Still detectably here, but probably more so because this current's also involved. That's, like, playing a role in making this one more detectable. So in the same way, like, this current, that's actually, like, even though it's going here, it's actually going here initially, which is along this wall. So, like, none of this is there initially. And then it continues and hits the resistance of those currents and crosses it. Maybe even plays a role in, like, the positioning of this eddy and these eddies as well. Like, not only is the current from up here going around and this going around and this going up here, so there's just like 3 currents feeding generally through this path, and then there's also this, so there's just a lot of eddies over here. But then the current for sure to a degree bounces off and kind of comes down here. Da, da, da. And then when the Earth expands, it abruptly jumps. So, like, this region that was kind of forming together over here, which is really like the before Earth expanded Pacific as it was forming here, just to, like, there, pretty much, those boundaries right there. That's before that's before 66 million years, when the Earth's rapid supernova phase, the fast supernova phase, after the slow supernova phase. Essentially, there's a beginning phase where it blows its top, and maybe that's what that was actually. Is this segment of it is blowing its top? Not when I thought it was when Antarctica like fully wrapped around the current, wrapped around it, and it blew its top. I'm leaning more and more towards this is it blowing its top, just like a shallogram, and that happened around the time of like the Permian, which is around, let's say, around 300 million radiometric dating. And so that was like, at that time, the ocean's floor was still like feeding into this region over here, and none of the, where just this segment was going. And maybe like when it expanded rapidly, it left behind this chunk that had the overlay. That's what happened. This current that was flowing and the other current kind of ran into each other a little too directly, and maybe their temperatures were, I'm not sure why the current from up here wouldn't go under the current from down here, unless this is kind of like cold stuff bubbling back up this way some reason, or hot. It would probably be hot stuff going back towards the pole in a way. I don't know, but in essence, this current and this current, over the current from over here overlaid the current from down around Baja California region, and it did so while this segment was solid enough that it just ripped away, it looks like. Where was it? This is over here. It's like it's forming teeth along the coastline because it's angled like this way. It's straight, almost straight across. But if we like take this one back to here and this one back to here to these two locations, then the angle of it becomes more like this. So it's almost like the current cutting across out of these locations is bubbling and then inward and then bubbling kind of thing, and then inward and then bubbling, and just bubbling and bubbling, producing this kind of tooth feature along the edge, which is perhaps energetically low tied to this like return of the current this way. And then over here, like this continues, these arcs kind of just continue, and then they separate in like multiple, oh my god, lava. We gotta look at this. Okay, I'm not gonna play it, but I'm gonna find it. We're gonna look at this because it's way too important to not check out right quick. Lava flows. Lava flows. Lava flows. This one, maybe? Yeah, yep. Definitely muted. I'm not playing it. We're looking right here. I noticed in my, I think it was in this video, Yin Yang, in this video, yin yang. I noticed. And it's blocked. The blocked video. It's blocked. I'd link it in. It's an hour long. But because I played this video right here, I'm not. It was literally. I'm just blocked. Anyway, so the current though, I noticed. This is what I noticed is there's these chunks, polygons, and their boundaries are not always like like over here. It's very much a single wave. There's a little subtle bit like difference in the wave there, a subtle difference there. But over here, there's more like differentials. It's almost like the boundary between this polygon and the boundary between this polygon are essentially going out of the same energetic frequency. And so they begin to form at the boundary a less unified singular wave and instead start to have features like this. And then over here to the point where it fractures, where one polygon's boundary is like over here, let's say, is this one over here, but this one's boundary goes like this and crosses over. And so each one of them like extends into the other to a point where this region, or else vice versa, they like this one goes back to here and this one goes back to here, so that there's an opening forming, because essentially this bubbles up kind of like this and releases a bubble, and it forms in a yin yang structure here. It's pretty much a yin yang. And so here it's a wave. Sorry. Here it's a wave, and then that wave begins to separate into different wavelengths. At which point the polygonal boundaries go out of sync, and this region just like here, I'll play this right quick. Oh, what? It does it. Where is it? It must have already happened. That's it. It just did that. Bubbled. Just there. Forming this region as it, like, expanding this region, pushing the boundary out, physically extending the boundary out so that the earth then, like, rapidly began to, when that bubble happened, which was really in this region, but maybe it was, if this is here, then this is here. So really the bubble was happening along this region, around here. Maybe this is the bubble's, like, general location when it was starting out, and that left behind like a side of one of the polygons over here, and then the other polygon actually moved away and the space between opened. Once this bubble happened, it severed the boundaries of the earth enough to break the bonds that cause like Chicxulub to go off, and all, like, by the pressure into the earth. By that, it essentially caused the bonds to break, and then rapidly magma just filled the space between and pushed this region over here. So the bubble that was formed over here just kind of flowed over here and expanded the Pacific Ocean largely by flows cutting across North America, this current across North America flowing into this region to fill it even further. Just pressing, essentially pushing against here, and then with a material that then like kept filling in the space with more material. Let's see if that matches the Oceanic Crustal Age very well. Essentially here it does. It has a this, but that's probably just from additional currents because of this current. Essentially what I was just describing was this current filling in over here, but then this current coming down here is going out over here, basically at this boundary. And this region is going out over here and filling in over here to then push against South America, pushing up the Andes down here. Like that right there is a focused channel of energy from this. Basically right from this thing was sending energy as the Earth expanded. It moved over this way, hinged here, where it basically looks like it might have like blown through here and just broken these apart. At which point it was able to more freely expand, and then it went back this way and maybe locked in there for a period to like just push the Andes by this torrent coming this way, as it then just like moved notch back to like a new notch that it like latched into over here, maybe something of that nature, and then it just kind of stayed in that position while it released material to fill over here. Also, there's like a Nova Center here, which probably is related to, I don't know. Not sure why there'd be cross currents there. But so that then would explain why there'd be like the oldest from this current coming across here, filling in this region. Or maybe filling in down, like if initially down and pushing here against, or flowing this way and breaking that apart until it pushed against here, maybe. And then once it broke through, it started to spray through to this region and spread out more here. So like it created these two plates. Yeah. Yeah, dudes. Fuck yeah. Whoa. Okay. Cool. See you soon, maybe. Probably. Definitely. See you soon.